Hello, and welcome to our product preview for Coachability, the foundational skill for all development. I'm Brianna Corin. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Zenger Folkman, and I'll start off today with a few introductions for who will be leading the webinar. Jack Zenger is our co-founder and Chief Executive Officer. If you're unfamiliar with Jack's work, he is a world-renowned expert in the field of leadership development. He's a best-selling author and a highly respected and sought-after speaker, consultant, and executive coach. He'll be joined by Kevin Wilde, who is currently the Executive Leadership Fellow at Carlson School of Management at the University of Minnesota. He's the best-selling author of Coachability, the Leadership Superpower, and Kevin has had quite a long and celebrated career in training and development, and we're very glad that he's joining us today to talk about this important topic. We are excited to talk about this program we have for Zenger Folkman. We realized that there was something that was missing in the training and development industry. Companies were putting all of this money and time and effort into these development programs and initiatives, and they were not seeing the payoffs. And we noticed from our research that a big problem with this was that companies and organizations were not preparing leaders and individuals to receive that training. And that's where coachability comes in. It is the start of any development journey. What you're going to see on the webinar today is just a small taste of our product. And now I'm going to turn the time over to Jack and Kevin to get us started.
Thanks very much, Bree. I am really delighted today to have this opportunity to do this webinar with my very esteemed colleague, Kevin Wilde. So, the agenda for today is as follows. We're going to begin by talking about the case for coachability and help you understand a little bit of the background of it. We're going to explain what it is, what it means, what's the framework for the coachability research, and then the starting points for how you would get going and doing it. One of the things that's happened in the 65 years that I've been involved in the leadership development world has been this enormous explosion of the idea and the use of coaching as a key component. An amazing change, an amazing growth rate. It's happening at all levels, from the very lowest levels in the organization's hierarchy, all the way to the very senior people. 30, 40 years ago, coaching was primarily focused on people not performing well. Now it's completely the opposite. The research that I've seen of late says executives prefer coaching as their primary vehicle for learning to be a better leader. So it's been a dramatic change in this whole world of how coaching gets used. But the fact of the matter is that nearly all of the attention has been focused on the coach. And yet we've kind of known in our heart of hearts that the coaching success requires a very positive relationship between the coach and the coachee. Years ago, a marriage counselor that I knew kind of made the observation that her experience as a practitioner was that in any relationship, the person who cares the least and behaves the worst controls its success. And that is certainly true of coaching. So with that, I would invite my colleague, Kevin Wilde, to tell you the backstory of coachability.
Thank you, Jack. And I think the shift to coaching is a positive thing, and now the shift to coachability is so important for us today. My backstory on this topic is a number of years ago, I was the chief learning officer, major corporation, and I had a chance annually to meet with the CEO and senior team to talk about the top 500 leaders, all officers, all directors worldwide, who's ready for promotion, how do we plan succession. Things were on a roll, we had a great team, lots of talent. But I started noticing year after year, there were a few names missing from the high potential list. In other words, they were on the list last year and they were not on the list. And as I dug into it, not only were they not on the list, they were not in the company. And I started doing a study on, hey, what's going on here? And what happened to those select few was their career derailed. Now, this is a simple explanation of it. If you look at the the y-axis, as we move in a career, we increase scope and scale of responsibilities from frontline supervisor to middle manager and beyond. And over time, the x-axis, there's a pivot point. And what I found in my study is these few leaders did not accelerate their potential, nor did they even flatten out their potential for moves. They, in fact, were demoted or terminated. And I started saying that that's something that we need to avoid. So I started doing an investigation on every case, would interview the manager, oftentimes the team around them, and I would dug into their personnel file. And what was most fascinating was their last 360 of record as others rated that leader. The same question came up time and time again that was significantly different than the rest of my population. And it was this question: does this leader seek and respond to feedback? As a matter of fact, let me give you the number on the next slide, that I found the derail leaders were 30% lower as seen by others on that interest in getting feedback and responding to it. And I think what once was a strong coachability habit failed and faded away, and they developed blind spots that were significant and they mattered. And so that got me on the path of, gee, what is coachability? How do we maintain it? And there's some powerful research. I went back and I talked to my friends at Zenger Folkman on, hey, what do you have in your database? I also did some academic research on the topic. And Jack, I'll turn it back to you to talk just a slice of that great research we found.
Yes, it wouldn't be a Zenger Folkman webinar without having you see some data. And so the data we want to show you is the relationship between coachability. This is a study of more than 50,000 leaders. Across the horizontal axis is their coachability, the degree to which they really actively and effectively practice self-development. And on the vertical axis, their perceptions of 13 other raters on average in terms of their overall leadership effectiveness. And what you see here is this very powerful relationship between perceptions of being coachable and perceptions of being overall a highly effective leader. And not only did this impact them as the leaders themselves, but it also affected the people who reported to them. And so here you have, again, on the vertical axis, the employee engagement scores. And these were the scores that the subordinates reported about their own level of engagement in the organization. And on the horizontal axis is coachability as seen by the people who were these direct reports about their boss. And what you see is that when the boss is perceived as being coachable, the level of their subordinates' engagement goes up rather dramatically. So it changes how people are perceived as leaders, and that spills down to the people who report to them. So those are the two findings we want to share with you right now. So Kevin, what is it?
We'll build it from there. And I've got to say that I do love the evidence-based approach that Zenger Folkman takes to development and leadership. And we're just giving you just a small part of the case that not only does being coachable help you avoid blind spots and derailment, but it's a better leader in so many ways. And we can go on and on. But let me just jump to the core here, which is a definition we had come up with. And it's 3 parts. That what is a coachable leader? It's first of all, someone that values self-improvement. Someone that feels that, hey, I'm still a work in progress and I'm curious and I want to learn. And secondly, they operate, in fact, in that learning zone. We'll talk about that in a second. But then they stay there with 4 specific practices of seeking, responding, reflecting, and acting. So we'll come back to those definitions. But what we want to shift now then is to some more insights on what we found in coachability, what we believe, and how to get better at coachability. What we found, went back to this great Zenger Folkman database and looked at 50,000 leaders, 360s, not just derail leaders, all leaders, worldwide, all industries. And what we found when we cut coachability by level is, sure enough, frontline supervisors were seen as the most coachable. In fact, it was 71% positive. And then the slide happened that by the time you got to a more senior executive, the perception was you're well below 50% on coachability. And of course, I think this has implications for avoiding blind spots. It means that we're not getting the benefits that we had early in a career in terms of being coachable. And I think also for those of you that are in the business of developing leaders, that there's an implication here. And that is your leaders have less interest in feedback and getting better naturally. And that gets in the way of learning new things that they have to learn. As we were digging into, well, what is going on here? By the way, this chart could also be displayed for age. That as we get older, coachability goes down. Also, other studies I've seen, tenure in role, the longer you're in the role, on and on. But we did find highly coachable leaders at all levels. We want to talk about that. But let's look at what are the problems behind it. Enter the faulty assumptions. So what we found is there's about a half dozen assumptions that either we start believing or others start treating us in a certain way that we believe contribute to this decline. I want to give you a sample of 3. The first one I call the false finish line. And you may have seen that in yourself or in others, that notion about, hey, I'm now the boss. I've been promoted. This whole getting feedback business, I'm kind of done with that now. I want to show my stuff. And certainly you've earned the promotion, you've got skills and experiences, but the learning doesn't stop because the world doesn't stop. And I think for my derailed leaders, they were guilty of this assumption, and that stopped their learning. There's a kind of corollary to that, and that's the second faulty assumption I'd like to share. And that is, I call it the superhuman stance. And in my teaching and coaching work, I bump into this often. And it's the notion about, I'd like to ask for feedback, even though I've been promoted and I'm doing things, but it's going to be misperceived as either weakness or I'm doubting myself. The imposter syndrome might be part of this as well. But again, the end result's the same. I'm not actively seeking input, ideas, feedback from others, and blind spots start creeping in. Before we go to the next slide, I want to tell you about one evening when I was starting to write the book. I was playing around with a Google functionality called Google Trends. And you can put in different trend terms and see how people are actively searching for things. So I put in 2 terms. One term, how do I give feedback? And the other term I put in was, how do I receive feedback? And there was a dramatic difference. And it was 10 to 1. So what Google was saying was around the world, people were getting more input and interest in how do I give it versus getting it. Now, let's be clear. Giving feedback is a tough job. And we want it to go well. We wanted people to understand it. We want to maintain the relationship. So I think it's great that we're asking. The gap is this, and I think it's also the faulty assumption. We're overlooking the other side. And in fact, I would say it's easier to give feedback if I knew the other person was Googling on how do I receive feedback. By the way, I've done the same thing in terms of YouTube searches, blogs, posts. There's an overweight, and to Jack's early point, we're training managers to be coaches, to give feedback. And that's great. We should do it. Zenger Folkman does it. But we need to start feeding the other side of the equation to match up. And that is how to be coachable.
Well, let's show you what our data shows. So here we have this grid again that shows coachability on the vertical scale and levels of confidence on the horizontal. And as I think maybe we sense, there's this, it isn't a simple conclusion. Indeed, what you see is there's a curve. And what that curve depicts is that for people with really low self-confidence, they are not as prone to ask for feedback. And if that level of confidence kind of rises, that moves them more into the learning zone. And as Kevin has noted, being coachable is putting yourself deliberately in the zone of where you want to learn. You believe you can be a better leader no matter how good you are right now. And so you're willing to learn. On the other end, however, if people have an excessive amount of confidence, and if indeed you kind of define that as becoming more kind of arrogant and not responsive to feedback, then it's this I don't care zone. It's that superhuman stance. I must be good or I wouldn't have been promoted, and I don't need to have any more, feedback from people around me. And so for that person, an increase in their humility brings them back into that middle learning zone. So the point that we're wanting to make is the people who are most coachable are those who clearly want to continue learning, and too little self-confidence gets in the way, and an excessive amount, if it can be defined as arrogance, that also gets in the way. So it's that middle ground that seems to be the real sweet spot, the real place of greatest value. And I think this, the CEO of the Cliff Bar company, Sally Grimes, really said it in a very elegant way. Humility is not the opposite of confidence. It's the freedom for learning. And that's what we have found is certainly the precursor to this. Now, the final thing that we'll say is a background of this whole topic of coachability is that there clearly are some attitudes or mindsets that people have that really make it more likely, make it more comfortable. And the first one is that fundamental assumption that if I receive feedback from other people, they're not doing it in a mean-spirited kind of way where that isn't their purpose, is just going to put me down, but they really do have my best interests at heart. And the second kind of important mindset is that confidence that if there's something wrong, I can fix it. I'm not lacking malleability. It's not that I can't change things if I want to. And the third kind of attitude or mindset that seems to be very important for people being coachable is that it may be a little uncomfortable for a moment when you get some feedback, but short-term uncomfortable for long-term progress and growth. And the final mindset is that the realization, and this, I guess, is particularly important for senior leaders, unless you deliberately do something to get honest, true messages, you're probably not hearing the complete story. So with those four attitudes or mindsets as the background, let's talk about the behavioral elements of being coachable.
So the notion is, and I'll go back to this definition we're putting out there, is coachable leaders at all levels have three things. Number one, that mindset and those attitudes that Jack just talked about, self-improvement, humility, the right amount of confidence, to keep themselves in the learning zone. And what we found in studying highly coachable leaders at all levels is they had habits, they had practices. And one of the things we're going to be bringing forth in the training is what are some new techniques we can bring in to help leaders get back into that learning zone. And the four I just want to touch on quickly: seek, respond, reflect, and act. And a couple tips here that you could pass along to the people you're training or try for yourself. So once you're interested in getting better and being coachable, the first thing you've got to do is you've got to go out and get some feedback, get some observations from others. And two things we'd share is, number one, have a question, have something you're curious about, asking what's one thing I could change or one idea to help my team. I love the question about, hey, here's something I'm working on. Can you give me any tips or how you're seeing me do it? And then also, in addition to seeking feedback and input, seek coaches around you. And that notion about having trusted advisors and coaches, internal, external, to give the perspective. I love the seek question. Hey, I got some input here. Before I dismiss it, what do you think? Or if you're me, what to pay attention to? The best leaders I know are both actively seeking input and nurturing truth tellers around them. So that's a few ideas on seek. The second thing is then, once feedback shows up, how you respond is so critical. And the best coaches we know have kind of a muscle memory. that they don't get into a defensive attack mode or an ignore mode. They get into, I'm curious. I'm going to suspend judgment. Let me understand more. And they've got these kinds of responses automatically wired that when they get feedback or they're getting coaching from someone, they're thanking them. They're saying, hey, I want to take a note on this, or can you give me an example? Elaborate. So they're curious to dig into it. And that, again, is a muscle that you've got to develop. The third thing then is you got to step back and think about it. Not all feedback is worth acting on. I think responding well is, but then acting is based on quality reflection. So the highly coachable leaders take that input, take that trusted advisor feedback, and they step back and they think about, is there any evidence that really would say this is important for me to consider? Or is there an underlying message, or am I connecting the dots here? So they spend some time reflecting on input and getting into a positive mode on, should I act on this or not? And then the other thing we've seen is the best leaders we know spend time in their calendar reflecting in general. Okay, we're on to act. And the notion is, once you do decide as a highly coachable leader, I want to do something about it, they've got to get a game plan. They've got a way of getting into the, if you will, the personal change process. A couple ideas we've seen is that notion about, I'm not changing everything. I'm just going to experiment with this one thing. And that's an easy way into it. Looking for those first small steps of something new to get momentum going. And then finally, whether it's truth tellers or other people, engineering support around you. So if you will, that's the whole cycle. And again, just to review, highly coachable leaders make a big difference, not only avoiding blind spots, but they have a mindset of, I want to get better. They find ways of keeping themselves in that learning zone with enough confidence to listen and ask, but enough humility to be curious and to think about new ways of doing things. And they've got a set of habits and practices that keep their coachability alive. So there's a few tips. Obviously, there's more that we could share, but Jack, I'm going to turn it back to you for the last part.
Okay. So I just want to tell you a quick story. A few years ago, Kevin came out and spoke at one of our leadership summits, gave a presentation on a really interesting topic. And after being home for 3 or 4 days, he picked up the phone and called me and said, Jack, I'm going to do that presentation again for another group. And I've got a favor to ask of you. And I said, why, of course, Kevin. And so he said, give me one suggestion about what I could do that would make that presentation better. Luckily, I'd pretty paid attention to what he'd said. And so I had thought of something at the time. I thought, if he had done this, it would have been just a little bit more helpful to me. And so I passed that idea on to him. Kevin, thanked me for that. And we exchanged pleasantries and he hung up. And I sat there at my desk and said, now I know why that person has been such a success in his career. He kind of asked me one specific thing that he could do. He wasn't fishing for compliments. He wasn't trying to have me kind of give him praise. And it was a very memorable lesson. And so when I first heard about this idea and his research on coachability, I was really struck and thought that it was an important message that more people could really benefit from. So I would invite you, as for yourself personally, to think about, is there one takeaway from this presentation today, one idea that's kind of struck home with you? And if so, what would that be? And then what's the one thing I can do that would make me more coachable during this coming week? Is there one thing I can take away? And as you think about your role in your organization, for those of you who have some kind of function in the leadership development world or in the HR world, or whether you're a line manager, I would invite you to kind of think about, where can I apply coachability in my learning and development role? First of all, who would benefit from it? And are there some people going through one of our company initiatives or programs who, if they had kind of begun that activity with some measure of their own coachability and how they could become personally more coachable, who would have benefited from that? And are there some major initiatives going on inside your organization that if they had this precursor of helping people be aware of the degree to which they were coachable, would that make a difference? So I would invite you to think about it both from a personal point of view and from an organizational point of view.
Hey, Jack, if I could add one thing here, thank you for
Yeah.
the kind comment. Trust me, every time I ask that question, everyone's got material. So I'm still a works in progress, trust me. But, having been in the chief learning officer role, I've got to say again, for those of you out there that are working so hard to build a great culture, to build talent for retention and strengthen your pipeline, I wish I would have had some coachability material to bring into the programs. And if you think about the programs you've had right now, whether it's leadership development for new managers, whether it's diversity, equity, and inclusion material, if someone walks in the room or logs in and they're not coachable, it's hard. And the notion about how to help them own their own coachability, I think, is the accelerator. And I'm very excited to partner with Jack and the team on getting this tool and this, if you will, this message out there that I think is going to make learning and cultures better.
Thanks, Kevin. So I have personally been in this leadership development world for 65 years. And I would just make the observation that this idea, this concept, is probably one of the 2 or 3 most important, most helpful initiatives that I've seen come along. And so we're going to have a quick word from Brianne describing for us a little bit about the product. And so I'll turn the time to you, Bri.
Thank you, Jack and Kevin, for those wonderful insights on coachability. I'm now going to share some of the logistics about our Coachability program and how you can bring it to your organization. You might be wondering, well, who needs coachability? And probably after listening to this, you've realized that anyone can benefit from being more coachable, from senior executives to individual contributors. We look at this as a precursor for all development initiatives. And especially if you're looking at doing a coaching engagement in your organization, we invite you to look at coachability before doing that. Now, at Zenger Folkman, we strive to be innovative and flexible to fit the needs of all of our clients. So this particular experience can be delivered live online, in person, or we can create a customizable experience for your leaders. We try to really focus on increasing self-awareness regarding openness and responsive to feedback. We want you to have an organization full of people who are seeking after feedback and who have practiced the appropriate responses to the feedback that they receive. We also want to elevate the willingness to act and implement the useful feedback. We have different sustainment tools that we have created to help people continue to grow their coachability over time. And we also have certifications that are available for you to certify an internal facilitator to deliver this development experience. I'm going to end with this little quote here. Coachability increases the payoff from all development initiatives by helping participants to be aware of their resistance, develop positive responses to feedback from others, and create valuable new habits. And that's what we all want and need from the individuals and leaders in our organizations. Now, we want you to experience the full session of Coachability. During the year, we have different live online sessions that are available. If you go to zengerfolkman.com and look at our events tab, you can register for one of those sessions. Or if you're interested in hosting a live online or in-person pilot program for your organization, you can indicate your interest in our exit survey, and we'll contact you with promotional pricing and details. Finally, after hearing all of this information, we're very sure that you want to get a copy of Kevin Wilde's book, Coachability, the Leadership Superpower. If you complete that survey, you'll be entered in for that drawing to win that book. As you can see the link there on the page, or we'll also have the link in the notes. Thank you for attending our webinar today, and we look forward to seeing you again.